All right, good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. I'm glad to have you all here for our weekly webinar. Today is Thursday, August 24th. This month has just been flying by, and I think that's at least partially because we've had so many great speakers and things to talk about, including our speaker for today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before I do that, as always, I'll remind everyone to mute. Looks like you all have done that. To feel free to use the closed captioning at the bottom of the screen if you need that. And that we are recording today's session so that you can certainly watch it again and or let your friends and family know that it will be available sometime tomorrow. So those are all of the announcements. I will talk a little bit about our speaker for next week after this week's presentation. So let's get to that. Today we have Dr. Jaime Perales-Puchalt, who is an assistant professor here at the KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And he has a background in psychology and public health, along with research in Spain, England, the United States, and collaborations with members of the European Union and the Americas. So we have an international expert with us today. Dr. Perales is the director of the Latino Brain Health Lab here at KU. And he focuses on decreasing Latino dementia disparities and increasing education and recruitment in research among Latinos. And it takes a special look at the risk of dementia and mild cognitive impairment among social and ethno-racial minorities. One of Dr. Perales' big projects is the Cuida Text Grant. Those of you who received the English version of my lines have seen the announcement about the Care Text Grant. For caregivers who support someone who lives with dementia. That grant is also available to Spanish speakers and I know has been quite beneficial for that population. Dr. Perales also has a Master of Science in Psychology from the University of Valencia. He speaks several languages, among them Spanish and Catalan and Valenciana. Am I saying that right, Jaime? Yes, close enough. I only speak English, Spanish, Alzheimer's, and Medicare, so very good. And Dr. Jaime is also the Assistant Director of Inclusive Science, Inclusive Outreach and Science and Recruitment at KU, and an all-around great fellow. I am super excited to hear what he is going to tell us about honorable, dignified, excellent aging today. So, with that said, Dr. Perales, bienvenido, and all yours.
Thank you so much for your great introduction. I don't think I've ever had such a positive introduction. I love it. And yeah, the thing with Valencian and Catalan, most will count it as the same language. Some people don't, but it's basically, yeah. So it's also almost like saying English from the US versus the UK, or or English from India. There's just different types of English. So yes, can you see my presentation? Thank you. And so honorable aging, and which I'm basically going to do like an Alzheimer's 101. And the topics I'm going to discuss today are: what is Alzheimer's disease? How does the diagnosis happen, basically, and the benefits of early detection. The treatment. I'm going to talk also about how to reduce the risk or promote brain health. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about a few resources. Some of them you probably already know. Some of them you might not. So it's always good to share with you all these resources. So first of all, everyone, including many researchers, tend to use Alzheimer's and dementia interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Dementia, or I even like to call it sometimes the dementias, are a group of diseases, many diseases of the brain. They have in common that they're chronic, and they affect memory and thinking, what we call cognitive changes, in the way that they impair our daily functioning. Our daily functioning is that our memory and thinking problems impair how we relate to others, how we work, how we drive, how we cook, those sort of things. it's not a normal part of aging. It is true that it is more likely as we grow older, like many other conditions, like many cancers, for example. Um, but um, but it's not a normal part of aging. Some people will never develop it. Uh, Approximately, there's like 1 in 10 people will have Alzheimer's or dementias in among people 65 and older. But then when looking at people 90, I don't know if it's 90 or 95 or older, it's about 4 in 10. So it increases, but still there's a 60% who don't develop it by that age, which is very important to consider. And also we know of ways that might reduce the risk of having dementias as well. So they're diseases, they're not a normal part of aging. And again, there might be ways to reduce the risk. So here's a very a drawing that I really like that summarizes this very well. Dementia is an umbrella term, and under that umbrella term, there are many types of diseases. Alzheimer's is one, but there's many others. Think of it, for example, of cancer. We think of, for example, colon cancer, breast cancer, and other types of cancers. Well, this is the same thing, right? As Alzheimer's dementia, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia. All these are different types of dementia. What they have in common is what I mentioned before: disease of the brain that impairs memory and thinking, and therefore your daily functioning. So we'll talk more about Alzheimer's specifically, but just to mention vascular dementia, it's related are these memory and thinking problems that are secondary to strokes or mini strokes. Lewy bodies dementia is related to Parkinson's disease, where you see those shaking and mobility problems, but also the thinking aspect of it. One of the main symptoms is visual hallucinations, so seeing things that are not there. And then the frontotemporal one, many of you might have in mind Bruce Willis, who was recently diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, right? And it sounds like in his case, it's language that's impaired. In other cases, there's also a behavioral aspect to it. And so people become more impulsive, for example. And move forward with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a gradual disease, what we call neurodegenerative. So people start with very small symptoms, memory and thinking symptoms, and they get worse and worse as the time goes by. Okay. Now each person might have different symptoms at different times, etc. But it's usually how it looks like. It starts with a very small thing, gets worse and worse. You can divide the progress of Alzheimer's into different stages. In an early stage, people tend to forget recent events. So where did I leave my money, my keys? What did we do yesterday? Which I'm sure many of you are like, oh, wow, this has happened to me. It happens to me too. It happens to all of us sometimes. It's okay. The problem starts happening when it happens more often. And even still, it doesn't mean you have it, but it raises a red flag that you need to go see your doctor. If you see a change, the change is the main word here. If there's a change, that might be an issue. Okay. So in more intermediate stages, people have problems performing in simple tasks. So doing things that they knew how to do well. I always give the example of my grandmother, who used to make a dish called paella from Valencia, from where I'm from. And she even won an award in the neighborhood and everything. And little by little, she started forgetting the ingredients, and it wouldn't taste as well. And then down the road, she stopped being able to make it. We had to take over, etc. Right? So that would be in that stage. Another good example would be people who start having more fender benders in the car or getting lost more often, etc., etc. On late stages, people become so dependent that others have to give them a bath or a shower or have to feed them. And in the end, they might, if they don't die of something else, they're going to be bedbound, and they will die of conditions of problems related to that disease. So unfortunately, Alzheimer's is fatal. We don't have a cure yet. Now, I said obviously they could die of something else, like a traffic accident, for example, or a cancer or some other issue. What I'm showing here on the right, so the bottom right, is out of the approximately 50, this might be a little old, but 5,500,000 people with Alzheimer's in the United States. There's a very small segment of that 200,000 still existing that developed Alzheimer's earlier than 65 years old. And these are called early onset Alzheimer's. So people can develop it as soon as the age of 30. It's very rare, but it can happen, and we need to know more and try to help them, obviously, as well. They have a set of specific issues as well. But then usually people tend to develop Alzheimer's after the age of like 65 or older. And as we get older, the higher the likelihood. What's called late onset Alzheimer's. These are some of the signs and symptoms. Memory loss, I'm sure that's the one that people tend to think about, especially short-term memory. Like I mentioned before, what did I do yesterday? But then memory loss, and in the long run, at the very end of the disease, people forget also things that happened a long time ago. For example, like just recognizing their families, for example, that could happen. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it is likely that will happen, right? Then changes in mood. I always give the example at the very beginning. If you have memory problems and you're aware of how that's impacting you, that's probably going to make you sad, right? Or if you don't recognize your family who is at home, you might think they're a thief, for example, and that's going to alter you as well. So those are just two examples of how mood can be impacted. Displacing belongings, we already mentioned the money, the keys. Hard to complete tasks, we already mentioned the cooking and driving. Confusion in time happens first, and then usually in space or place. So at the beginning, again, it might be more like missing the month, like no longer knowing what month we're in, for example. Later, forgetting the year, and then later forgetting where you are. And I've had a person in the moderate to severe stages who would think in 2020 or so, when I saw them, that we were in Mexico in the 1950s. That's how disoriented somebody can be. So social withdrawal, if there's a lot of stigma, unfortunately, still in the community, that we need to educate the community so that to remove that stigma, because that can be a big problem for people and their family, for people with Alzheimer's and their family members. So obviously that's gonna, in many cases, it leads to, knowing that you have that problem might lead to social withdrawal and not looking for help, etc. Also, like having issues understanding others can also lead, for example, to social withdrawal. So there's also poor judgment, and that would be, for example, telling somebody something you wouldn't have told them before the disease. Like in my family, it was, for example, my grandmother telling my aunt that she was fat. She would have never said that in the past. And it was just that part of the brain that tells you, don't say that kind of stuff, kind of might go away with Alzheimer's. But we need to be ready to know that happens, because it doesn't come from their heart. It's the disease that's creating those things. Struggle to communicating, and this could be speaking, could be understanding, writing, etc. And changes in vision, most related to the depth and brightness, that might impair how they find their bathroom or their driving, etc. What happens in the brain? Where on the left we have a picture of a brain that is, say, normal, I would say healthy. To the right, one that has Alzheimer's, and basically you can see how it's the one on the right has shrunk, right? And there's more like empty spaces, and that's because there's been a buildup of harmful proteins called tangles and plaques that from inside and outside the neurons, or the brain cells, they kill them. So basically, what happens if they kill them? That those things form the brain tissue, and therefore the brain tissue is going to go smaller, basically. An example I like to give is, think of a neuron as a cable that leads to a light bulb, right? So if you cut the cable, the light bulb is not going to work. The light bulb would be the memory, right? Okay. Here's just a picture. Well, it's not a picture. It's an image, a brain image of someone with Alzheimer's when we saw them at baseline, and then we saw them 2 years later. And what you can see, I'm going to pass them back and forth. Well, basically, you can see after 2 years is that there's less white, just brain tissue, and there's more black, which is basically liquid that is filled because that part of the brain tissue has died. Okay, so that's that shrinkage that I was talking about before. What causes Alzheimer's? We, unfortunately, in most cases, we don't know what causes Alzheimer's, but we know that there are certain risk factors. I'm going to talk about the ones that are modifiable, the ones that we can change. This is actually from a relatively recent paper. They found that 40% of factors of the risk can be explained by these factors that can be changed. So education is one, access to education, hearing loss, traumatic brain injury, hypertension, excess of alcohol, obesity, smoking, depression, social isolation, physical activity, air pollution, and diabetes. All these are, so this ball here would be in early life, this one would be in midlife, this one would be in later life. And all of them together explain 40%. In general, obviously there's a lot of things here. In general, if a good thing to remember that works for many of these things is what's good for your heart is good for your brain, right? So that diabetes, obesity, smoking, all those things affect your heart. Obviously, because these are modifiable, they don't talk about genetics. Some people are afraid, like, my mother has Alzheimer's. Will I have Alzheimer's? It doesn't have to be that way. And, they might not have a specific gene that might raise your chances a little bit. So not necessarily, and even if you had that, you would just have a little bit of a higher risk, but not much. There are a very small percentage of people that have this gene that if you get it from your parents, you definitely develop it. But again, there's very, very, very few people with this gene. Okay. In general, there's a lot of all these factors are way more important. And again, and one thing is you might have obesity, but that doesn't, even if you have it, that's just a thing that raises your probability a little bit. It doesn't mean that you develop it just because you have obesity, for example. Those are just different things that increase your risk to some extent. Here are some myths about what causes Alzheimer's. So all of these are things that people have believed in the past, and the Alzheimer's Association put them all together in a way with evidence that scientists have found to show that none of these is true, right? Drinking or cooking out of aluminum cans do not cause Alzheimer's. Aspartame sweetener does not cause Alzheimer's. Silver fillings does not cause Alzheimer's. Vaccines do not cause Alzheimer's, and they can save lives, very much so. And Alzheimer's is not contagious. All these are myths. There you go. Let's go to next. Let's talk about diagnosis. Early detection is important. Starting at approximately 65. When you're 65 and older, even if you have Medicare, for example, it's included within the Medicare annual wellness visit. Obviously, other insurance companies might have a similar thing, but not necessarily. But they can give you a yearly screening to see if you have memory issues, if you have risk of memory issues, right? So why is it important to get checked? Because you might have a memory and thinking problem, but it might be something that's curable. I was giving this talk somewhere the other day, and someone said, yeah, actually, that happened to my mother. She thought it was Alzheimer's. We were very very depressed because we already thought it was Alzheimer's. And then she went to the doctor. It turns out it was an interaction with the medication. When they removed that, she got better, and now she doesn't have memory problems anymore. So it could be as simple as that, or B12 deficiency, or a thyroid disease problem, etc. Things that are not a dementia that cannot be cured. Might have Alzheimer's, but it might be are things that we can do to improve your life, right? So there's medications, there's behavioral programs. There are so many things out there that can help, and not just you, but your family members too. And in fact, the earlier we know, the better. Why? Because the earlier we discover that someone has Alzheimer's, the earlier we can help, and while the person can still make decisions. If we wait, the person will be losing their ability to make those decisions. So who's going to take care of you when you're no longer able to do so? Who's going to decide if we sell this house, or what we do with your possessions? How about your health decisions? And that sort of thing. All the financial stuff, like financial, legal services. All the earlier that we pick up on that, the better. Alzheimer's, I mean, different doctors have different ways, but in general, things that are very important are an interview with a person who might or might not have Alzheimer's, and their loved one. Like it could be a family member, a close friend who knows them very well, right? And therefore we can contrast different perspectives. And we ask them about, do you have memory and thinking problems? When did they start? Tell me more about them. Is it impairing your daily functioning? Can you cook? Can you drive? Could you all that stuff? And then obviously also knowing about their mood as well, how it's affecting their mood, their social activities, etc. And also family history, what medications you're taking. Let's see what conditions the person has, etc. And all that together will help us have an idea of what's going on. Then, in addition to that, other things that are usually done are memory and thinking tests. So, for example, telling you 3 words and asking you to repeat them to me, and then saying, well, now I want you to remember, because I'm going to ask you again in 10 minutes, and seeing how many you can remember, right? That's just one example. There's also brain images that can be done, like the one that we showed earlier, and blood tests. Now, these are not going to tell you if you have Alzheimer's or not, but they can tell you if you don't have, for example, a brain tumor, or if you don't have a stroke. It can help you tell different diseases apart. In general, a medical doctor, when they come out of their medical school, they are probably not very prepared to do this, but there's training that, for example, we give at the ADRC to train them and feel more comfortable with giving diagnosis and treatment. Regarding treatments, unfortunately, there's no cure. That's why we need a ton of people to participate in research, because we believe, the first person to be cured will be a research participant. That's how progress works in science, right? There are several treatments that can help. For example, memory and thinking and activities of daily living, those are going to go down, but we can slow down the worsening. So they might go down, but slower, right? With the right medication, with exercise, with special healthy diets, etc. There's also depression, worry, and agitation with the right, especially behavioral programs and education to the family and the person. Those, you might even remove some of these. We can improve quality of life as well, and also the impact on the caregiving. There's support groups, there's programs like our text message program to educate and give resources to family members, and there's respite care as well, and several others. Regarding brain health, many of these you probably already know. Eat healthy, so less sugar, less fat, and more fruits and vegetables. Being physically active, so doing exercise that makes you breathe a little harder than when you're just sitting still. That could be, for me, it's running. So for some people, it's just walking at a certain pace. Not smoking. Continue to learn like you're doing right now. Right now, you're learning, I'm sure, something new. So you're actually protecting your brain by just being here. Stay connected to family and friends. Sleep well. This is 6 to 8 hours. Hopefully, if you usually sleep at night, just similar patterns. And if you have heart diseases, just control them with the right medication, like your doctor said. I'm gonna 5 minutes, so I'm gonna introduce these. Hopefully, I can do it. I'm gonna share some slides. No slides, sorry. Let me see. Some links here. My Alliance. Many of you are already in my Alliance, but just so you know, these are emails that are very informative with education about dementia, how to reduce the risk, and if you have it, how, or your family has it, how to care for yourself or your loved one, in English and Spanish. They're a weekly email that you will get, usually I believe on Mondays. This one is a guide that I really like for those who already have a family member with memory problems. Here you go. There's another link from the NIH. You can receive it. It's either you can get PDF, but you can also get a free copy sent to your house, and more than one if you need more than one for your family members. They're all free. This one is Together We Can. I really like it as well. It's if you know what a telenovela is, it's a soap opera about Alzheimer's. It's very short, simple to read, and very just reading friendly, about a family who has Alzheimer's and how they cope with it. Why should we participate in research? Like I mentioned before, we believe the first person to be cured will be from a research study, from a treatment given in a research study, but basically to help the science, advance the science to hopefully one day cure it, right? So improving the lives of patients, relatives, the society as a whole. Some studies also include health monitoring and they might give you some information back. So that could be a secondary benefit, even though the first one that I mentioned is the main reason for doing research. And some studies might have benefits, right? If the intervention that they're experimenting with works, there you go. That's a potential benefit, even though it's not assured, right? But those are things to take into account. The next thing I wanted to give you is, if you're considering participating in research, these are questions for you. It's mandatory actually for you guys to be educated on what does it take to participate in research. What are your rights? Understand the study very well before you make a decision to participate. So the link that I just shared is a PDF that includes all those questions that is good for you to take and ask the people who are running the study, okay, for you to be more informed. There's a lot of studies at the ADRC. I run the ones mostly on caregiving, and given the time, I'm going to tell you about, we have a study for Latino specifically, Latino family caregivers. It's all via text message and phone calls. It's called Alianza Latina. It's obviously at no cost. It's 6 months. We send approximately 1 message per day to educate on Alzheimer's and other dementias. And that's to the caregiver, family caregiver. And also to provide resources and techniques on how to cope with the stress of caregiving, and how to make your home safer for your family member, etc. I'm going to give a phone number, just the general one, even though I'm going to show a few numbers. Just keep the one that I mentioned in the chat, 913-588-0555. If you're interested in this one, just say you're interested in Alianza Latina. It's in English or Spanish, in what you prefer. We have a very similar one. But this one is the Alianza Latina one is across the country, including Puerto Rico. This one called CareText is a very similar thing for people of any ethnic or racial background. But given the funding, we're serving people in a specific area on the Missouri side. So it's the counties are Ask Clay, Ray, Platt, and Jackson. The same, it has no cost. It's text messaging. It works exactly the same. We just adapted it to the whole population instead of specifically Latinos. But you can also find it in English or Spanish. And with that, I'm done for the day, and I'm open to any questions. I know we're a little over time. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perales. I did forget to say at the beginning that people could use the chat for questions. So feel free, anybody, if you want to put your question in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, that would be absolutely fine.
I can't get to the chat on my phone.
Okay, Susan, go for it. What's your question?
Two questions. What about aluminum in deodorant, lifelong use?
So the aluminum in general, there hasn't been found a risk for Alzheimer's specifically. I don't know about other things, but that's the conclusion that the Alzheimer's Association came to. Okay.
I had a brain scan a while back, and they said there was ischemic brain disease, I believe is what they called it. Can you give me a better idea of what that means for me?
It sounds to me, and I would suggest you talk to your doctor though about that, but it sounds to me related to stroke. Let me look very quickly.
I haven't had one of those that I know of.
Let's see. Ischemia is the restricted blood supply of a tissue or organ caused by obstruction of narrowing of a blood vessel. So it's a vascular issue that affects your brain, right?
What could I be doing that's causing that?
That's very complicated, and that would
okay.
It's better to talk to your doctor when it's like for any of these, especially vascular, anything that has to do with like eating healthy, exercise, following the right medications for cardiovascular issues. So, for example, for high blood pressure or diabetes, etc., those things should help for vascular issues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions? Speaking of questions, if you have more for Dr. Perales, please go for it. But I'll also take this moment to say that next Thursday, the speaker for our webinar will be Dr. Russell Swerdlow, who is the director of the KU ADRC, and he has very generously offered to do a sort of ask me anything related to Alzheimer's disease session. So if you have questions that you'd like to have answered by another one of our great experts, Dr. Swerdlow is giving us his time next Thursday. He has asked to get as many questions as possible beforehand so he can have time to think about the answers. So if you have a question for Dr. Swerdlow, try to keep it fairly general and not individualized, because we probably won't be able to do individual personal questions. But if you have questions about research or prevention or treatment or the new medications or anything that might be good for an audience like the webinar, we welcome those. You can send an email to myalliance@kumc.edu. This will also be in your next issue of My Alliance, which comes out on Monday morning at 7 o'clock. So feel free to email those. I will receive them, and I will make sure all questions are anonymous. And then I will share them with Dr. Swerdlow so he can be thinking about the answers. So that's what we'll do next Thursday. He'll be with us at 2 o'clock and ready to answer your questions. And depending on how many questions and how the conversation goes, we may be able to take some live questions, but he did want to have at least the opportunity to think about questions ahead of time. So keep those things in mind for the next week. Dr. Perales mentioned early detection, so I'll remind you all to watch our newsletter for upcoming screenings of why. The next one that's coming up is September 7th in Pittsburgh, Kansas, September 8th in Wichita. And I hope by next week's webinar, I will be able to tell you all the details about a screening we are having in drumroll, Kansas City, Missouri. I can't tell you yet, but it's coming. And hopefully by this time next week, I will be able to release that information So stay tuned. Dr. Perales, muchísimas gracias for your presentation. Always learn from any time I spend with you and talking to you and hearing you. So thank you very much. And I know people found it really useful today to hear the truth about what dementia, what Alzheimer's is, and all of those things. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing your time. All of you who are watching, thank you for being here today. Stay cool over the next few days. Maybe this time next week will be 1 degree lower in temperature. That would be nice. And watch your email for the Next My Alliance newsletter. And have a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.